The story starts with introducing Celie, who was abused by her own pa. She had a younger sibling named Nettie, who was pretty and bright. Celie was raped and impregnated by her own father. One day, a man named Mr. Albert came to their house and asked their father to marry Nettie. Their father disagreed and gave Celie instead. After she got married to Mr. Albert, Celie was also abused by him. Nettie ran away from home and went to Celie's house. Mr. Albert gave her permission to stay, but after she rejected his advances, he kicked her out of the house. Since no letter was written from Nettie, Celie assumed that Nettie was dead and Celie's life was miserable. Celie met Sophia, who was Harpo's wife. Harpo was Mr. Albert's son. She told her to fight back, just as how she fought back at Harpo. Mr. Albert brought his ill mistress, Shuck Avery, to their house. Celie took care of Shuck and they fell in love with each other. After finding out that Celie was beaten by Mr. Albert, Shuck chose to stay in Georgia. Shuck worked at Harpo's bar. Shuck then got married to a man named Grady, but was still close to Celie. One day, they found the letters from Nettie that was hidden by Mr. Albert. After reading those letters, Celie had found that Nettie was living with a couple named Samuel and Corinne, and she found out Celine's children, Olivia and Adam. Not long after, Corinne died. Celie then spoke up against Mr. Albert and moved to Tennessee with Shuck. She started a new life there by sewing and designing clothes. She returned to Georgia only to find that Mr. Albert had changed his ways and her father was dead. The house at Georgia finally became hers. Celie and Mr. Albert reconcile. Although they do not love each other, they still enjoy each other's company. After several decades abroad in Africa, Nettie returns with Samuel, who is now her husband, and with Celie's 2 children. The sisters have a blissful reunion, and although they're now old women, they've just begun the best years of their lives.